You have 30 days to remove that bridge. Constance Whitmore screamed it in my face, then walked away, heels clicking like a countdown. I looked at the notice taped to my gate, removed my bridge, or they'd remove it for me. A deadline wrapped in threat. She didn't know what I knew. They wanted me gone, my land was their prize, and a piece of paper seemed like a weapon enough. But here's the thing about power. The loudest voice isn't always the one holding the cards. Sometimes it's the quiet one who built the deck. If you're watching this unfold from somewhere unexpected, drop a comment below. I'd love to know where this story finds you. Monday, 7 o'clock. Sunlight broke through the kitchen window and fell across the old counter. The house creaked once, the kind of sound that meant everything was still standing. Outside, Merrick Creek ran slow beneath the bridge my grandfather built in 1954. The water caught the light in silver pieces, reflecting up through the trees. Then I heard the car, an engine cutting through the quiet, tires crunching gravel on the county road. I didn't move toward the door, just watched through the kitchen window as a black SUV pulled up outside my gate. 3 people climbed out. Constance Whitmore first, precise in movement, her expression set like someone who'd already decided how this would end. 2 board members flanked her, both carrying clipboards like shields. She walked straight to my gate, her heels making small puncture sounds against the ground, and taped something to the metal frame. Then she turned, looked directly at my house, and her mouth tightened into something between a smile and a warning. They climbed back into the SUV, gone in less than 2 minutes. I waited until the engine sound faded completely before I walked outside. The morning air carried the smell of wet leaves and creek water. My boots left prints in the dew-covered grass as I crossed the yard. The notice fluttered slightly in the breeze, white paper stark against the weathered iron of the gate. I pulled it free, the tape making a small ripping sound. The header read, Pine Valley Estates Homeowners Association, Notice of Violation. Below that, typed in bold, unauthorized structure identified on shared easement. The owner must remove it within 30 days or face legal action. Daily fines of $500 will apply after the deadline. This is your final notice. At the bottom, Constance's signature, printed and looped in blue ink like she'd enjoyed signing it. I read it twice. Then I folded it once and walked back inside. The coffee had gone lukewarm. I set the notice on the counter and stared at it for a long moment. Shared easement. They were claiming the bridge sat on common property. The bridge my family built 70 years ago on land we owned before Pine Valley existed, before this whole valley was anything but dirt roads and farmland. I opened the drawer beneath the kitchen counter, the one that stuck unless you pulled it at an angle, and took out the metal file box my grandfather gave me when I turned 18. Inside, deed records, survey maps, old photographs of the land when it was empty. I spread them across the kitchen table. The deed showed clear boundaries. The survey map from 1970, faded but legible, placed the bridge entirely within Merrick property. In the margin, my grandfather's handwriting. Easement agreement, verbal, goodwill only. Goodwill. That's what he'd built this place on. Let the neighbors use the bridge when they need it. Let the county run a power line through. Built a substation on the property when the valley started growing, thinking it would serve everyone fairly. I ran my finger along the edge of the survey map, tracing the property line. Then I looked out the window toward Pine Valley Estates. The gated community sprawled across what used to be empty hills, 120 homes packed behind brick walls and electronic gates. The morning sun hit their street lamps wrong, making them flicker slightly. I noticed that last week too. Small power fluctuations, nothing major, just enough to catch my attention. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed Iris Calloway. She answered on the second ring. Silas, it's early. Her voice carried that lawyer's sharpness even before coffee. I told her about the notice. She went quiet for 3 seconds. I counted, then said, They can't do that. The bridge is private property. I'll draft a response. Don't do anything until we talk this afternoon. I agreed and hung up. Then I opened the second drawer, the deep one on the right side of the table. Inside sat a thick folder with a label I'd written myself 15 years ago. Merrick Substation, Power Supply Agreement, 1998, 2-48. I didn't open it. I just rested my hand on top and looked out the window again. The bridge sat 50 yards from my front door. Wooden planks, steel supports underneath, wide enough for one vehicle. It crossed Merrick Creek at the narrow point and connected to County Road 47 on the other side. That road curved north, ran along the edge of my property, then forked. One direction led to town, the other led to the main entrance of Pine Valley. But there was another route into the community, Oak Drive, the main access road that wound up from the south. Steep grade, prone to erosion. Last week's rain had left cracks in the asphalt. I remembered seeing the caution signs. Landslide risk. They posted those every autumn when the weather turned. I finished my coffee cold, rinsed the cup, and walked outside again. This time I headed toward the bridge. The morning had warmed slightly. Birds called from the trees along the creek. My boots thudded hollow against the wooden planks as I stepped onto the bridge and stopped in the center. Below, the water moved slowly and brown, carrying leaves downstream. I looked back at my house, white paint peeling in places, porch sagging slightly on the left side, the kind of building that had grown into the landscape over decades. Then I turned and looked toward Pine Valley. From here, I could just see the entrance through the trees, the clubhouse roof beyond. They wanted this land. Constance had made that clear over the years. Polite suggestions at first, then written offers, then complaints about property maintenance, noise, aesthetics, anything to create pressure. I'd ignored it all. But this was different. This was forced. I knelt down and ran my hand along the bridge railing. Solid wood, recently treated, no rot, no structural issues. I'd maintained it myself, same as my grandfather had, same as my father before his heart gave out. There was a small metal plaque bolted to the railing, green with age. Private property, Merrick Family Estate, 1954. Someone had scratched at it with a key or coin trying to scrape the words off. Recent damage. The metal underneath still shone bright. I stood up slowly. The wind picked up, moving through the trees with a sound like static. I thought about my grandfather standing in this exact spot, teaching me how to read a survey map when I was 10 years old. Land doesn't lie, he'd said. Paper might. People definitely will. But land tells the truth if you know how to listen. I pulled my phone out again and took photographs. The bridge from multiple angles, the plaque, the property marker is half buried in grass on the east side. Then back at the kitchen table, I opened my laptop. County records, property databases, zoning maps. 20 years in urban planning taught me where to look, what to cross-check, and what silence in a document really means. For the next hour, I traced deeds, transfers, and utility filings. Every record said the same thing. Pine Valley's land stopped short of mine. No easement, no right-of-way, just 30 years of borrowed goodwill. I sat back, eyes on the unopened folder that waited like a verdict. Inside was a contract 50 pages long, signed by my grandfather and the Pine Valley developer in 1998. An agreement to supply power from the Merrick substation to the new community. 50-year term, fixed monthly rate. And one clause near the end, page 43, highlighted in yellow marker by my grandfather's hand. Either party may terminate this agreement with 90-day written notice in the event of material breach of contract, including but not limited to property damage, harassment, trespassing, or failure to maintain mutual respect and goodwill. I'd read that clause 100 times over the years, never thought I'd need it. I closed the laptop and walked to the window. The sun had climbed higher now. The street lamps in Pine Valley flickered again, 3 quick pulses, then steady. I watched them for a full minute. Then I looked down at the notice still sitting on my counter. 30 days. They thought that was enough time to break me, to make me fold, to take what wasn't theirs. I picked up the notice, folded it carefully into thirds, and slid it into the folder with the power supply agreement. Then I called Iris back. "I'm coming in this afternoon," I said, "and I'm bringing everything." 3 days passed. Thursday morning, I sat across from Iris in her office downtown. Glass walls, polished desk, the smell of fresh coffee and old law books. She spread my documents across the table like evidence at trial. Survey maps, deed records, photographs of the bridge. "This is clear cut," she said, tapping the survey map with her pen. "The bridge is entirely on your property. They have no easement, no right-of-way, nothing. I'll send them a formal response. They'll have to withdraw the notice." Her voice carried certainty, but her eyes said something else. Careful. Constance Whitmore doesn't back down easy. I drove home under gray clouds. The weather had shifted overnight, wind from the north, the kind that carried rain. I spent the afternoon in my workshop, fixing an old radio, trying to keep my hands busy. The shed smelled like sawdust and motor oil. Outside, the trees bent in the wind. I kept the door cracked open, listening to the sound of leaves scraping across the roof. By evening, the sky had gone dark purple. I made dinner, ate it standing at the kitchen counter, washed the plate. Then I sat down with a book I wasn't really reading and waited for the feeling in my chest to settle. It didn't. 10 o'clock. The sound came through the walls first, mechanical, distant, wrong for this hour. I set the book down and listened. A saw. The high whine of a chainsaw or circular saw cutting through wood. I stood up fast enough that the chair scraped against the floor, grabbed my jacket, stepped outside into cold air that tasted like rain. The sound was louder now, coming from the direction of the bridge. I could see lights through the trees, bright work lights, the kind contractors use, throwing harsh white circles against the darkness. I ran, not a full sprint, but close. My boots hit the ground hard, the path uneven beneath me. Branches caught my shoulders as I pushed through the tree line. Then I saw them. 3 men standing on my bridge with power tools and safety vests. One of them had a circular saw pressed against the wooden planks, sparks flying orange into the night. Another held a crowbar, prying up sections that had already been cut. The third stood near a truck parked on the far side, feeding extension cords from a generator. And standing apart from all of them, arms crossed, watching like a foreman, Constance Whitmore. "Stop!" I shouted it across the distance, my voice swallowed by the saw noise. None of them heard. I got closer, close enough to feel the vibration of the saw through the bridge planks beneath my feet. "Stop! This is private property." The man with the saw finally looked up. He killed the motor. The silence after felt too big. Everyone turned to look at me. Constance smiled. Not friendly, sharp. "Mr. Merrick," she said, "you received notice. We're simply removing the hazard." Her voice was calm, practiced, like she'd rehearsed this moment. "This bridge is on my land," I said. "You're trespassing." She tilted her head slightly. "The bridge crosses a shared easement. The HOA has a responsibility to maintain safe access for the community. Your structure is a liability." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "You have no easement, no right to be here." She reached into her jacket and pulled out a folded paper. "We have documentation that says otherwise. You can challenge it in court if you'd like, but by then, this hazard will be gone." She turned to the workers. "Continue." The saw started again. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. The operator answered with static. I gave my address, said there were trespassers destroying my property. "Is anyone in immediate danger?" she asked. I looked at the 3 men cutting through the bridge supports, at Constance standing there like she owned the night. "They're destroying my bridge right now," I said. "Send someone." She told me officers were en route, estimated 20 minutes. I hung up and just stood there watching them tear apart something my grandfather had built with his hands. By the time the patrol car arrived, they'd cut through a third of the bridge deck. Officer Dunbar stepped out slowly, flashlight in hand, taking in the scene with the exhausted patience of someone who'd seen too many property disputes. "What's going on here?" Constance spoke first. Explained that the HOA was removing an unsafe structure, that I'd been notified, that this was all above board. Dunbar looked at me. I told him the bridge was private property, that there was no easement, that they were trespassing and vandalizing. He wrote things down in a small notebook, his handwriting barely visible in the flashlight beam. "This looks like a civil matter," he said finally, speaking low into his radio that crackled without answer. "You'll need to file a complaint with the county. Without a direct order, I can't stop work claimed under authority." I stared at him. "They're destroying my property." He nodded. "I understand. But without a restraining order or injunction, I can't intervene. You need to take this to court." He looked at Constance. "I'm documenting this call. Both parties should contact their attorneys." Then he got back in his car and left. The taillights disappeared down the road. The saw started up again. I stood there until they finished for the night, until they loaded their tools back into the truck, until Constance climbed into her SUV and drove away without looking at me once. The bridge had a 10-foot gap now, sections of decking torn away, support beams exposed, raw wood showing white where the saw had cut through. I walked to the edge and looked down at Merrick Creek below. The water moved black and silent. I couldn't cross now, couldn't drive out. The nearest alternate route was 40 miles around, and that was if the roads were clear. I walked back to the house, left the lights off. The dark felt heavier now, pressing in like the quiet after a funeral. I thought about my grandfather teaching me to hammer nails straight, about the first time I painted the bridge rails beside him, about his words on the substation stone. Power serves. It does not rule. Constance's face stayed with me, lit by work lights, cold as machinery, and the sound of the saw kept echoing long after it stopped. Then I thought about the power lines running from my property to Pine Valley Estates, about the transformer humming in its concrete housing a quarter-mile from where I sat, about the contract in the folder on my table, about the clause on page 43. I stood up and turned on the kitchen light, made fresh coffee. I opened my laptop, started drafting an email to Iris with the subject line, "We need to talk." Tomorrow, Friday morning, came cold and clear. By 6, I was outside, camera in hand. The gap looked worse in daylight, jagged wood, hanging beams, splinters scattered like shrapnel. I took shots from every angle, wide, close, tire tracks, footprints, collected a cigarette butt, marked measurements. Evidence, all of it. I launched my drone, flying a grid over the bridge and property line. The footage showed everything, the 10-foot break, the damage, the limits of my land. I backed up the files 3 ways. 20 years in planning had taught me, documentation isn't paranoia, it's protection. By 8, I was at my lawyer's office. She had black coffee waiting, the conference table filled with evidence. "This is bad," she said, watching the drone video, "but also good. Trespass, property destruction, open and shut. We'll file for damages and an injunction." Her notes came fast, sharp lines across the pad. "There's more," I said. She looked up. I told her about the power, about the substation, about the contract my grandfather signed 50 years ago. Her pen stopped moving. "You own their power supply?" I nodded. "And the contract has a termination clause if they breach." She leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling for a long moment. "That changes everything," she said finally. "You're not just the victim here. You're holding leverage they don't know about." I didn't say anything. Just wait. "We need to be careful," she continued. "If we play this wrong, you become the villain. Man cuts power to 120 families, children, elderly, medical equipment." She met my eyes. "Are you ready for that?" "I'm not trying to hurt anyone," I said. "I'm trying to make them understand there are consequences." She nodded slowly. "Then we do this right. File the lawsuit, document everything, give them every legal option to make this right before we go nuclear." She opened a new document on her laptop. "We'll send them a notice of breach, list every violation, trespassing, property damage, harassment. Then we give them a choice, repair the bridge, pay damages, public apology, and we strongly recommend they review their leadership." Her fingers moved fast across the keyboard. "If they refuse, then we issue the 90-day termination notice for the power contract. Let them scramble to find an alternative. Let them explain to their community why they're sitting in the dark because their HOA president destroyed someone's property." We spent 2 hours drafting the notice, 8 pages, single-spaced, citations to property law, contract law, precedent cases where utility providers terminated service due to breach. She walked me through every paragraph, every clause, making sure I understood what we were threatening. "This is a nuclear option," she said again. "Once we send this, there's no taking it back." I thought about the bridge, about my grandfather's voice, about Constance standing in the work lights watching them tear everything apart. "Send it," I said. After the meeting, I drove to the county clerk's office. The building smelled like old paper and floor wax. I knew the woman at the desk, who had worked with her years ago on zoning disputes. She nodded when she saw me, didn't ask questions, just pointed me toward the records room. I spent 3 hours there, pulling files from dusty cabinets. Property transfers, easement agreements, utility permits, everything related to my land and Pine Valley Estates. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The copy machine wheezed when I fed it documents. What I found confirmed everything. No recorded easement for the bridge. None. Pine Valley Estates was incorporated in '95 on land purchased from a developer who'd bought it from the county in '92. But my property, 2 hectares including the bridge and creek, had never been part of that sale. It predated everything. I found my grandfather's original filing from 1954, found the power supply agreement from '98, found his handwritten notes in the margins. Built this substation for the future, never thought they'd be so ungrateful. The words are different now, I made copies of everything, paid the fee. I drove home with a cardboard box full of paper proof sitting in my passenger seat. The bridge gap looked even wider from the road. I had to park on the far side and walk across using the support beams, balancing carefully over the creek. My house felt different when I finally got inside. Quieter, more isolated. I made lunch but didn't taste it. Just chewed and swallowed while staring at the documents spread across my kitchen table. The power supply agreement was straightforward. 50-year term. Fixed rate of $2,000 per month. Pine Valley paid on time every month for 26 years. Professional. Clean. But there it was on page 43, highlighted in my grandfather's yellow marker. Termination clause. Breach of contract. 90-day notice. I read it again. Read it a third time. Then I looked out the window at the power lines running from my property toward their community. Thin black lines against the gray sky. I could see them from here, could trace their path all the way to the transformer station at the edge of Pine Valley's brick walls. My phone buzzed. Text from my lawyer. Notice of breach sent via certified mail and email. Copies to the entire HOA board. Expect a response within 24 hours. I texted back a thumbs up. Then I walked outside, got in my truck, and drove the long way around, 40 miles through county back roads, to reach the substation. It sat on the northwest corner of my property, surrounded by a chain-link fence and warning signs. Danger, high voltage, authorized personnel only. I unlocked the gate with the key my grandfather had given me decades ago. The same key. Never changed the lock. Inside the small concrete building, everything hummed with contained energy, transformers, switchboards, meters showing load and voltage. I checked the gauges out of habit. 2.3 megavolt amperes. That was the current draw from Pine Valley. 120 homes pulled power through lines my grandfather had installed. I ran my hand along the metal housing of the main transformer. Still warm, still working, still serving. I thought about his words carved in the cornerstone outside. Power serves. It does not rule. But power could also leverage, could also teach, could also demand respect. I pulled out my phone and took pictures. The meters, the load readings, the maintenance log shows 26 years of uninterrupted service. Then I locked up and drove home. Evening had started to settle. The clouds had thickened. Rain is coming soon. I sat in my kitchen with all the evidence around me, photographs, documents, contracts, proof, and waited for my phone to ring. It did. 10 minutes later. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, listened to the message twice. Constance Whitmore's voice tight with anger. You can't do this. You can't threaten to cut power to an entire community. I'll bury you in court. The message was cut off. 30 seconds. Not enough time to say everything she wanted to say. I saved the voicemail, added it to my evidence folder. Then I called my lawyer back. She called, I said. Good, she replied. That means she's scared. That means she knows we're serious. I looked out the window. The streetlights in Pine Valley were starting to come on, one by one, automated, programmed, dependent. What happens now? I asked. My lawyer's voice came back calm and certain. Now we wait. We gave them the terms. They have 90 days to decide if their pride is worth sitting in the dark. Saturday morning. My lawyer called at 8. We need to meet. Now. Her voice had that edge it got when something had shifted. I drove the long way again, 40 miles around because the bridge was gone, and made it to her office by 9:30. She had documents already spread across the conference table, coffee pot half empty. She'd been here a while. They responded, she said, sliding a paper toward me. HOA letterhead. 3 paragraphs. The first denied any wrongdoing. The second claimed the bridge removal was justified under community safety regulations. The third threatened a countersuit for extortion and abuse of utility monopoly. At the bottom, a lawyer's signature I didn't recognize, not Constance's. They lawyered up, I said. She nodded. Corporate firm out of the city. Expensive. They're taking this seriously. She poured herself more coffee, didn't offer me any. But here's the thing. Their response is weak. They're threatening, but they're not defending. They know they don't have an easement. They know they trespassed. This is posturing. She sat down and opened her laptop. So we call their bluff. We move forward with the lawsuit, and we make sure they understand exactly what you control. We reviewed the power agreement line by line. Every clause, every loophole, every bit of leverage. The contract's airtight, she said. Your grandfather locked them in at 98 prices. Today's rate is triple. The termination clause triggers on breach, and they've met that. Trespass, destruction, harassment. Solid ground. What about the families? I asked. She glanced over her glasses. Their board made the call. Consequences follow leadership. Still, we'll give them options. Fix the bridge, pay damages, apologize, replace the president. If they refuse, the blackout's on them. While she drafted, I pictured the valley, lights glowing in kitchens, kids doing homework, old folks breathing through machines, every life powered by my grandfather's substation. 50 years of goodwill turned into leverage. How long do they get? 90 days, she said. Enough to adjust, not enough to relax. By noon we had the full notice of breach ready, 8 pages detailing every violation, citations to property law, contract law, precedent cases, a list of required remedies, and at the end, clear as sunlight, failure to comply with these terms within 30 days will result in the issuance of a 90-day termination notice for power supply services as permitted under Section 7.3 of the Power Supply Agreement dated March 15, 1998. My lawyer sent it via certified mail and email to every member of the HOA board. Then she looked at me. Now we wait. They'll have to call an emergency meeting. They'll have to face their community. And they'll have to decide if their pride is worth the consequences. I drove home through the gray afternoon light. Rain had started, light but steady, the kind that would last all day. I parked on the far side of the bridge gap and walked the support beams again, boots slipping slightly on wet wood. Inside my house, I changed into dry clothes and stood at the kitchen window watching rain run down the glass. My phone stayed silent for 2 hours. Then it rang. Unknown number again. I answered this time. Mr. Merrick, a man's voice, smooth, professional. This is calling on behalf of Pine Valley Estates HOA. We'd like to discuss the situation. I waited. We believe there's been a misunderstanding. The bridge removal was conducted under legitimate safety concerns. We're prepared to negotiate a settlement. Negotiate what? I asked. You destroyed my property. There's nothing to negotiate. Repair it, pay for it, apologize for it. Silence on the other end. Then, Mr. Merrick, we're offering to rebuild the bridge at HOA expense. We'll cover all costs. In return, we ask that you withdraw the power termination threat and sign a formal easement agreement for community access. I felt something cold settle in my chest. No, I said. You don't get to destroy something and then buy your way into owning it. The bridge stays private property. You repair it because you broke it. That's not a negotiation. That's the consequences. If you proceed with the power termination, he said, voice harder now, we'll file for an injunction. We'll sue for damages. We'll make sure every media outlet knows you're holding families hostage over a property dispute. I looked out the window at the rain, at the power lines running toward Pine Valley. File whatever you want, I said. My grandfather built that substation 70 years ago. Built it when this valley was empty. Your community exists because of the infrastructure we provided. And you thanked us by destroying property in the middle of the night. So no, we're done negotiating. You have 30 days to meet the terms in the notice of breach. After that, you have 90 days to find another power source. I hung up. My hands were shaking. I set the phone down on the counter and made coffee I didn't want. Outside, the rain came harder. I thought about calling my lawyer back but didn't. She'd know soon enough. They'd escalate. File motions. Contact the media. Try to paint me as the villain. Man versus community, David versus Goliath. Except I was Goliath somehow, the powerful one, the threat. I finished the coffee, but it sat cold in my chest. Through the rain, Pine Valley's lights flickered on, too early, too easy. No one there thought about the current carrying through storms and wire. They just flipped switches, trusting the world to serve them, trusting goodwill to last without end. I opened the drawer and pulled out the folder one more time. My grandfather's handwriting on the inside cover. Power serves. It does not rule, but service requires respect. Remember that, Silas. I'd read those words 100 times. Never understood them until now. He'd built the substation knowing this might happen someday. Knowing that power, real power, the kind that keeps lights on and heat running, required both giving and boundaries. He'd given. For 50 years. And now it was time for boundaries. My phone buzzed. Text from my lawyer. HOA filing emergency injunction hearing. Monday morning. They're moving fast. I texted back. Good. Let them explain to a judge why they destroyed private property and then demanded access rights. She sent a thumbs up. Then another message. BTW, a local reporter contacted me. I want to interview you. Name is calling from the county paper. Says he's been following HOA disputes for years. Interested? I stared at that message for a long time. Media meant exposure, meant public opinion, meant the story going beyond courtrooms and lawyers. I couldn't control the narrative anymore, but maybe that was the point. Maybe Constance needed to answer questions in public, needed to explain her actions to more than just her board, needed to face the community she claimed to represent and justify why she'd started a war over land that wasn't hers. I texted back, "Set it up, I'll talk to him." My lawyer's response came fast. "Smart. Get your story out first. Control the frame. I'll arrange it for tomorrow." I set the phone down and looked out at the rain again, at the lights burning bright in Pine Valley, at the power lines carrying electricity from my property to theirs, at the bridge gap that had started everything. Somewhere in that community, Constance was making calls, planning strategy, rallying her board, preparing for war. She thought she was fighting a retired urban planner. I thought I was just a man with an old house and a grudge. She didn't know my grandfather had taught me to read power grids before I could read maps. Didn't know I'd spent 20 years planning infrastructure for cities. Didn't know that quiet didn't mean weak. I walked to the substation that evening through steady rain, unlocked the gate, checked the meters, 2.3 megavolt amperes, steady load. Everything is functioning. I put my hand on the transformer housing and felt it hum, felt the power moving through it. I felt the responsibility. Then I locked up and went home to wait for Monday. Sunday afternoon. The reporter showed up at 3, driving a sedan that had seen better years. He climbed out carrying a messenger bag and a digital recorder, mid-30s with the tired eyes of someone who'd covered too many small-town scandals. We sat on my porch even though it was cold. He said he preferred outdoor interviews. More honest, he claimed. I made coffee. He set the recorder between us on the weathered wood table and pressed record. "Tell me what happened," he said. So I did. I walked him through everything. The notice. The night they cut the bridge. Officer Dunbar said it was a civil matter. The gap that now separated my house from the county road. I showed him the survey maps, the deed, and the photographs of the destruction. He took notes by hand even though the recorder was running. Old school. When I finished, he sat back and looked at me. "And the power?" he asked. "People are saying you're threatening to cut electricity to 120 families. I met his eyes. "I'm not threatening anyone. I'm enforcing a contract they violated. They trespassed. They destroyed my property. The power agreement has a termination clause for breach of contract. I'm using it. But families will be affected," he said. "People who had nothing to do with the bridge." I'd thought about this answer all morning. I practiced it in my head. Those families elected a board that broke the law. They gave that board the power to act in their name. Actions have consequences. I offered them multiple ways to fix this. Repair the bridge, pay damages, apologize, remove the president who ordered the destruction. They refused everything. I leaned forward. "I didn't start this. I'm just the one who's not backing down." He nodded slowly, still writing. "What do you want people to know?" I thought about my grandfather, about the substation, about 50 years of goodwill burned in one night. I want them to know that power, real power, isn't about who shouts loudest or who has the most money. It's about who built the infrastructure, who maintained it, who kept it running when nobody was paying attention. My grandfather built that substation in 1975 when this valley was empty, built it thinking it would serve everyone fairly, and for 50 years it did, until someone decided respect was optional. The reporter kept writing. "When will your article be published?" I asked. He looked up. "Wednesday. Front page, most likely. This is bigger than a property dispute. This is about HOA overreach. About what happens when community boards think they're above the law." Monday morning brought the injunction hearing. County courthouse, 3rd floor, courtroom that smelled like old wood and anxiety. Pine Valley's lawyer stood near the front. Expensive suit, leather briefcase. The kind of confident posture that came from winning often. My lawyer sat beside me in a chair that creaked. The judge entered and we all stood. He was older, gray-haired, reading glasses perched on his nose. He'd seen 1,000 property disputes. This was just another Monday. The HOA's lawyer went first, spoke for 10 minutes about essential services, community welfare, vulnerable populations, used words like hostage and extortion and unconscionable, painted me as a man weaponizing utilities to punish innocent people over a minor dispute. My lawyer stood when he finished. She was quieter, calmer. She laid out the facts in order. Notice of violation based on false claims, nighttime trespassing. Property destruction without due process. No recorded easement, no legal authority. She showed the judge the survey maps, the deed records, the photographs of the bridge gap. Then she pulled out the power supply agreement. Your Honor, Mr. Merrick's grandfather built the substation that powers Pine Valley Estates in 1975. The community has been purchasing power under a 50-year contract signed in 1998. That contract includes a standard termination clause for breach. The HOA breached by trespassing and destroying property. Mr. Merrick is simply exercising his legal rights under a contract both parties signed. The HOA's lawyer objected, said the termination clause was never meant for this situation, that it was punitive, that cutting power endangered lives. My lawyer cut him off. If the power is so essential, perhaps they shouldn't have destroyed property belonging to their power supplier. Mr. Merrick gave them options: repair the bridge, apologize, compensate damages. They refused. They're in court today trying to avoid consequences for their own actions. The judge listened without expression, made notes, asked a few questions about the contract terms, about the easement claims, about the timeline of events. Then he leaned back. I've heard enough. The HOA clearly violated Mr. Merrick's property rights. The injunction is denied. However, he looked at me. I'm ordering both parties into mediation. Mr. Merrick, you have the legal right to terminate the power contract, but I urge you to consider the impact on residents who bear no responsibility for this situation. The gavel came down. My lawyer gathered her papers. The HOA's lawyer looked pale, whispering urgently with someone from the board I didn't recognize. We walked out into the courthouse hallway. Television cameras were waiting. Local news. I hadn't expected that. A reporter pushed a microphone toward me. Mr. Merrick, are you really going to cut power to families with children and elderly residents? I stopped. I looked at the camera. I'm asking them to repair what they destroyed. That's all. If they choose pride over accountability, the consequences are theirs. My lawyer pulled me toward the stairs. The cameras followed for a few steps, then gave up. We made it to her car. She started the engine but didn't drive. It's going to get worse, she said. They're losing in court, so they'll try to win in public opinion. Expect calls. Expect harassment. Expect people to show up at your property. I looked out the window at the courthouse steps, at the reporters packing up equipment, at the HOA lawyer on his phone, probably calling Constance with bad news. Let them come, I said. I'm not hiding. My lawyer dropped me at my truck. I drove home the long way, radio off, thinking about what the judge had said, about innocent residents, about elderly and children, about consequences flowing downward. By the time I got home, the article was online, county paper's website, front page digital, headline, Local Man Fights Back Against HOA Overreach, but Who's Really in the Wrong? I read it standing in my kitchen. The reporter had been fair, presented both sides, included quotes from me and from the HOA's corporate lawyer, included the photos of the destroyed bridge, included the history of the substation and power agreement. Within an hour, the comments section had exploded. People taking sides. Some support me, some call me heartless, some share their own HOA horror stories. The story had gone viral, at least by county standards. My phone started ringing. Unknown numbers. I stopped answering. Let them all go to voicemail. Some were reporters, some were angry residents from Pine Valley. One was from someone claiming their mother needed a ventilator and asking me to reconsider. I listened to that one 3 times. I felt the weight of it. Then I called my lawyer. They're putting pressure on me, I said. Medical equipment, vulnerable people. She was quiet for a moment. Are you having second thoughts? I looked out the window, at the bridge gap, at the power lines. The lights started to come on in Pine Valley as evening fell. No, I said. I'm just making sure I can live with this. She exhaled. Then stay the course. We're 3 days from the 30-day deadline. After that, you issue the 90-day termination notice. They'll have time to find alternatives. You're not leaving anyone in the dark. You're just refusing to be their doormat. I hung up and stood in the kitchen as the house darkened around me. Outside, Pine Valley glowed bright with electricity my family provided. Inside, I sat in the shadows and waited for someone to blink. The 30-day deadline passed on a Tuesday. Wednesday morning, my lawyer filed the 90-day termination notice. By noon, Pine Valley called an emergency town hall. They sent an email to every resident. Public meeting at the clubhouse. 7 p.m. Topic: critical community issue. I wasn't invited. I went anyway. The parking lot was full when I arrived. Cars packed tight, people streaming toward the entrance in clusters. I recognized some faces from the courthouse. Mostly I didn't. Inside, the clubhouse meeting room was standing room only. 100 people at least, maybe more. Folding chairs in rows, all filled. People lined the walls. The air smelled like coffee and tension. A long table sat at the front with microphones. 5 board members. Constance in the center, flanked by their corporate lawyer. She saw me enter. Her jaw tightened. Whispers spread through the crowd as people noticed me standing in the back. The board president, a man in his 60s I'd never met, called the meeting to order, explained the situation in careful language. Property dispute, power contract, 90-day notice. He made it sound inevitable, like weather. Constance leaned forward to her microphone. We want everyone to understand that we're exploring all legal options. We're in contact with the County Utility Commission. We're negotiating with alternative power providers. But these things take time. We may face temporary disruptions. The crowd erupted. Questions shouted over each other. How temporary? What about my mother's oxygen machine? Why did this happen? Constance raised her hand for silence. I didn't get it. A woman stood up. Late 40s, professional clothes. I read the article. You destroyed his bridge without legal authority. Is that true? Constance's face went rigid. The bridge was a safety hazard. The HOA has a responsibility. The woman cut her off. Did you have an engineer inspect it? Did you have an easement? Silence. The lawyer leaned to his microphone. That's an ongoing legal matter we can't discuss publicly. The woman didn't sit. You started a fight with the man who supplies our power. Why would you do that? More voices joined. The room fractured into arguments, some defending Constance, some demanding answers. The board president banged his gavel, the sound sharp and useless. Then a man stood, older, military bearing. I recognized him from court, one of the board members who'd voted against the bridge removal. My name is on the board, he said, voice cutting through the noise. And I need to say something. I voted against removing that bridge. I argued that we had no legal right. I was overruled by the president who assured us she had authority. He turned to look at Constance. Did you have authority? Constance stood, face flushed. I had the community's best interests. He shook his head. That's not what I asked. Did we have the legal right to destroy private property? The room went quiet, waiting. Constance opened her mouth. I closed it. The lawyer whispered something to her. She sat down. The board member looked at the crowd. We need new leadership. I'm calling for a vote of no confidence in the president, immediately. Chaos. Half the room on their feet, some shouting support, some defending Constance. The lawyer tried to invoke procedure, talking about bylaws and proper channels. Nobody listened. The board president banged his gavel again. We'll hold a formal vote next week. Tonight we need to focus on solutions. Someone from the back yelled, The solution is fixing what you broke. Heads turned. It took me a second to realize they were looking at me. I hadn't planned to speak. I hadn't planned to say anything. But the room was staring now, waiting. I stepped forward slightly. I'm Silas Merrick, I said. I didn't need a microphone. The room was that quiet. I didn't come here to make speeches. I came to hear what you'd say, to see if anyone would take responsibility. I looked at Constance. She stared back, defiant. My grandfather built the substation that powers this community 70 years ago, built it on goodwill. For 50 years that goodwill held. Then your board destroyed my property in the middle of the night and told me to prove it was mine in court. I paused. Let that sit. I gave you options. Repair the bridge. Apologize. Pay damages. You refused. You're in this situation because your leadership chose pride over accountability. I'm not your enemy. I'm just the person who finally said no. A woman near the front stood, elderly, thin. What do we do? She asked. Her voice shook slightly. I looked at her. You vote. You hold your board accountable. You remove the people who put you in this situation, and you make it right. You have 90 days to find alternative power. That's more than fair. It's more than I got when they destroyed my bridge. I turned to leave. Stopped. I looked back at the board table. And for what it's worth, I don't want to cut anyone's power. I just want basic respect. You can still fix this. The question is whether your pride will let you. I walked out. The room erupted behind me, arguing, shouting. I pushed through the clubhouse doors into cold night air. My hands were shaking. I'd never spoken in front of that many people. Never wanted to. But something about seeing Constance sit there, still defiant, still refusing accountability, it broke something open. I drove home with my headlights cutting through darkness. Pine Valley's lights burned bright in my rearview mirror. For now. I didn't know how long that would last. Didn't know if they'd fix this or force my hand. But I'd said my piece. Put it on record. The next move was theirs. 2 weeks passed. The county paper ran a follow-up article. Pine Valley HOA president resigns amid scandal. I read it over morning coffee. The investigation had started after the town hall meeting. Someone on the board, probably the veteran who'd called for the vote, had requested a financial audit. What they found made the bridge dispute look minor. $12,000 in HOA funds spent on personal expenses over 2 years. Dinners charged to community maintenance budgets. Hotel stays during conferences that never happened. Credit card statements that didn't match receipts. The board voted 45-3. Constance resigned the next day, refused all interview requests. The article said she and her husband were selling their house, moving out of state, starting over somewhere nobody knew the story. I set the paper down and looked out the window. Construction crews had been working on the bridge for a week now. Pine Valley's insurance was covering it. New lumber, reinforced support, proper permits this time. I'd been out there every morning to check their work, make sure they weren't cutting corners. The foreman was professional, apologized for the original destruction even though he hadn't been part of it. Should have been done right the first time, he'd said. I appreciated that. Accountability without excuses. Thursday afternoon, someone knocked on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened it to find the board member from the town hall standing on my porch. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt, no clipboard, no official bearing, just a man with something to say. "Mr. Merrick," he said, "mind if we talk?" I stepped aside, let him in. We sat at the kitchen table. I offered coffee. He accepted. We sat in silence while it brewed, the machine gurgling in the background. Finally, I poured 2 cups and sat down across from him. "I'm here unofficially," he said, "not representing the board, just myself. I wanted to say I'm sorry." I didn't respond. Let him continue. "I voted against the bridge removal, voted against every aggressive action Constance pushed, but I didn't push back hard enough, didn't go public until it was too late. I let her consolidate power because it was easier than fighting." He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "I'm retired military, 25 years. I was trained to recognize bad leadership, and I recognized it in her, but I stayed quiet because I didn't want the conflict. That was cowardly." He met my eyes. "So I'm apologizing, not for the board, for myself, for not standing up sooner." I took a drink of coffee. It was too hot, but I didn't care. "What's the board doing now?" I asked. He seemed relieved to move past the apology. "We're restructuring, new bylaws, no major decisions without legal review, no actions affecting individual properties without documented authority, and we're creating a neighbor relations committee. Make sure we're not just talking to ourselves." He paused. "We'd like you on that committee, if you're willing." I must have looked surprised because he continued quickly. "You don't have to. I know we've given you every reason to say no, but you understand property law, infrastructure, long-term planning. We could use that perspective." I thought about it. About my grandfather building the substation, about goodwill and boundaries, about whether I wanted to spend my retirement attending HOA meetings. "I'll think about it," I said finally. He nodded, seemed to understand that was the best answer he'd get today. We finished our coffee in more comfortable silence. When he stood to leave, he held out his hand. I shook it. "The bridge should be done in another week," he said. "And we're adding something, with your permission." I waited. A new plaque, acknowledging it as private property. "Thank you for allowing community access, making it clear whose goodwill makes that access possible." I nodded. "That works." He left. I watched his truck pull away, then went back to the window. The bridge was taking shape again. Better than before, actually. Wider planks, LED lighting underneath for safety, reflective strips on the rails. The gap that had separated me from the county road was closing. In 3 days, it would be whole again. I walked outside, down to the creek bank, stood where I'd stood the morning after they cut it. The air smelled like sawdust and fresh paint. The construction crew was packing up for the day. One of them waved. I waved back. Strange how normal that felt. That evening I drove to the substation. Hadn't been there in a few days. Unlocked the gate and stepped inside. The equipment hummed its usual rhythm. I checked the meters. 2.4 megavolt amperes. The load had increased slightly. People coming home from work, turning on lights, starting dinner, living their lives without thinking about where the power came from. That was fine. That's how infrastructure was supposed to work. Invisible until it wasn't. I ran my hand along the transformer housing. Still warm, still serving. My grandfather's handwriting was carved in the cornerstone by the door. Power serves. It does not rule. I'd read it 1,000 times. Finally understood what he meant. Power without restraint becomes tyranny. But power with boundaries, that could serve everyone. I locked up and drove home. The mail truck was pulling away from my box. I grabbed the stack, bills, advertisements, and a large envelope from my lawyer. I opened that one first. Settlement agreement. Pine Valley HOA agreed to pay $30,000 for bridge repairs, legal fees, and damages. Agreed to permanent recognition of my property rights. Agreed to formal easement documentation that protected both parties. Agreed to annual maintenance contributions for the bridge. Everything we'd asked for. Everything they should have done from the start. At the bottom, signatures from the new board president and their lawyer. I signed it, scanned it, emailed it back to my lawyer with a single word. Accepted. Night fell while I was making dinner. Through the window I could see Pine Valley's lights coming on. The street lamps that had flickered in Chapter 1 burned steady now. I'd been maintaining the voltage carefully, making sure they knew I was still there, still watching, still providing. But I'd never seriously considered cutting them off. Never wanted to. The threat had been enough. The boundary had been enough. They'd learned what my grandfather knew, that real power doesn't need to be used to be respected. It just needs to be understood. I ate dinner at the table with my grandfather's survey maps still spread out. The maps that had saved me, that had proved what was mine. I thought about calling my lawyer to thank her, decided it could wait until morning. Instead, I washed my dish, turned off the kitchen light, and stood in the darkness looking out at the lights of Pine Valley. They glowed bright and steady, as they should, as they would continue to, because that's what goodwill looked like when it had boundaries. I turned away from the window and went to bed. Tomorrow the bridge will be closer to being finished. Tomorrow will be quieter than today. Tomorrow will be normal again, or something close to it. 3 months later. Early spring. I woke to sunlight cutting through the bedroom window, the kind of light that feels like a promise after a long winter. 7 o'clock, Monday morning. I made coffee the same way I always had, French press, water just off boil, 4 minutes steep. The ritual mattered. The consistency. I stood at the kitchen counter while it brewed, looking out at Merrick Creek. The water ran higher now with snowmelt from the hills, clear and fast. The bridge stood complete across it, new wood still pale against the older supports. The plaque they'd installed caught morning light. Merrick Bridge, private property SR 1954, community access granted with gratitude. I took my coffee to the porch. The air still carried cold, but spring was underneath it. Birds I hadn't heard in months were back. A couple walked across the bridge, both in running gear, moving at an easy pace. They waved when they saw me. I waved back. Didn't know their names. I didn't need to. The gesture was enough. Acknowledgement, respect. The things that should have been there from the start. I watched them disappear up the county road, their footsteps hollow on the wooden planks. The sound made me think of my grandfather. On the day he'd brought me here when I was 10 and explained why he'd built the bridge wider than it needed to be. Always build for what might come, he'd said. Not just what's here now. After breakfast, I drove to the county office. Had a meeting with the Planning Commission. They'd asked me to consult on a new development proposal, review the infrastructure plans, check the utility assessments, and make sure someone was thinking long-term. I'd agreed. Not because I needed the work, because I'd spent 50 years watching people build things without understanding what they were building on. Foundations mattered. Infrastructure mattered. The invisible systems that kept everything running mattered. Someone needed to remember that. The meeting lasted 2 hours. I drove home under clear sky, took the direct route across my bridge without thinking about it. That was good. It meant things were normal again. That afternoon I walked to the substation. The key still fit the same lock my grandfather had installed in 1975. Inside, everything hummed with contained energy. I did my monthly inspection, checked the transformers, read the meters. 2.4 megavolt amperes. Stable, consistent. The logbook showed 50 years of service without major interruption. My grandfather's handwriting in the early pages. My father's in the middle years. Mine for the last 2 decades. 3 generations maintaining the same equipment, serving the same valley, watching it grow from farmland to community. I added today's readings, noted everything as normal, signed my name. Then I stood there for a moment with my hand on the transformer housing, feeling it hum. The cornerstone still carried my grandfather's carved words. Power serves, it does not rule. I'd been thinking about that phrase for months, about what it meant, about what he'd been trying to teach me. Power was responsibility. Power was service. But power was also knowing when to say no, knowing when to draw boundaries, knowing that service without respect wasn't service at all. It was exploitation. He'd known that, built it into the contracts, built it into the infrastructure itself, left me the tools I'd need when the time came. I locked up and walked back to the house as evening started to settle. The lights of Pine Valley came on as I watched from my porch, one by one, automated and reliable. The street lamps burned steadily without flickering, the houses glowing warm behind their windows, families making dinner, kids doing homework, people living their lives supported by infrastructure they didn't think about. That was how it should be. That was the gift my grandfather had given this valley. Not power, reliability, not control, service. I finished my coffee and went inside. The house felt different now, less isolated, less embattled, just a house again, old and comfortable and mine. I sat at the kitchen table with the survey maps put away finally, the folder with the power contract closed and filed, the legal documents archived, everything in its place. My phone buzzed, text from my lawyer. Dinner next week? My treat, you earned it. I texted back a thumbs up, set the phone down. I looked around the kitchen, the old counter, the sticking drawer, the window that faced the bridge. Everything is the same as it had been 6 months ago. But different too. Clearer somehow. More defined. I knew where the boundaries were now, knew what was mine and what was theirs. I knew that goodwill had limits, and that was okay. Night came slowly and quietly. I didn't turn on the television, didn't need noise, just sat in the growing darkness and watched through the window as Pine Valley's lights burned steady and bright. The power flowing from my property to theirs. The connection was maintained. The infrastructure is working. My grandfather had built all this thinking about the future, about what might come. He'd built it strong enough to last, strong enough to bend without breaking, strong enough to teach. I stood up, turned off the kitchen light, and looked out one last time. The lights continued burning, as they should, as they would. That was power, not the taking, the giving, and knowing, always knowing, that you had the choice.
Thanks for watching HOA Stories. Share this video with someone who loves a good plot twist. And don't forget to subscribe.